Today's session is hosted by the Papa John Center for Entrepreneurship at Iowa State. And for this year's series, we're featuring the Ivy College of Business professors who are within our entrepreneurship program here at Iowa State. So we're getting to learn about the great research that they do and apply that directly to ourselves as entrepreneurs and how we can take that information and apply it in our ventures. So just going through my notes, making sure that's everything. Yes. So yes, if you could please interact using the chat function today, that'll be great. And I will hand it over to Paul to introduce himself and kick off our presentation for today.
Oh, thank you, Megan. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Sanchez. I am an assistant professor in the Ivy College of Business Department of Management and Entrepreneurship. And I want to extend very warm thanks to the Papa John Center for hosting. These webinars are super important and super helpful to translate what we do on research and how these can be applied to the real world. So again, thanks Papa John Center for facilitating this forum. And to get things started, let me say that I was also an entrepreneur. Not recently, a few years back, my wife and I, we were entrepreneurs. We launched businesses, but I particularly, before meeting my wife, I engaged in entrepreneurial activities. So I clearly understand what it is, what it takes to be an entrepreneur, how these challenges can be or can constrain entrepreneurship. So I'm hoping that with this presentation today, you can get a better perspective on things that we should do as entrepreneurs, but also things that we also need to do, but vary because we are human beings. And ultimately, we engage cognitively in our daily actions and decisions. So our personality traits are reflected in the decisions that entrepreneurs do every day. So I'm hoping at the end of this presentation that I don't only convince you, but I'm encouraging you to better understand yourself and how this can help you thrive as you engage in entrepreneurship. So, for the agenda that I plan today, it is 4 main things that I want to communicate. And the first one, it is the things that we need to do from day 1 to day 30. Those are things that every entrepreneur must do. Then from day 31st to the 100, those are things that we also do as entrepreneurs, but you will see at the end that in this specific phase from the day 31 to 100, there is so much variation on how entrepreneurs engage in decisions and actions. So therefore, one of my research areas that I like to explore, and I do see a fertile area to better understand entrepreneurs, it is on this notion of personality traits. So I'll talk briefly, very high level, on the specific personality traits that I personally in my research have found impactful for the entrepreneurial journey. So that ultimately the last point that I want to cover is that it is not simply what I have experienced, but also based on my research. So you will see an integrated framework that shows how these different personality traits have been found to affect specific processes and outcomes of entrepreneurship. So moving things forward, let's start with this day 1st to day 30. What are the things that entrepreneurs must do, right? So we will cover very high level, big picture of what it takes to engage with the legal requirements, the bookkeeping, getting up and running, and intellectual property. So Megan, can you click on the next one, please? So legal requirements, right? We definitely need a lawyer. We need to lawyer up when we think strongly about entrepreneurship. That is, we can easily file for a business name, but beyond that, remember that entrepreneurs are going to start creating innovations, new product offerings or services. And inevitably, we're going to deal with people. And within these sort of transactions, things can go wrong, not only from the entrepreneur, but from the customer perspective. Also, entrepreneurs engage with different people, with employees, with other stakeholders. So the idea here is that entrepreneurs, since day one, since they figured it out that this is the passion, this is the path, the career that they want to pursue, they must start thinking about the legal framework for their businesses. I have seen in the past many entrepreneurs having great ideas, great innovations, great intellectual property, but they fail because of this specific purpose that they do not have the law team or they don't lawyer up, and then they inevitably face challenges that can kill the business. So here the advice is entrepreneurs, they need to choose the business ownership form, they need to file for a federal employee identification, register whether the business has implications for the federal, state, or local government. They need to get these licenses, um, and then that's one side. So if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see things that entrepreneurs need to do from an external perspective. But once you start looking on the right-hand side, there are things that entrepreneurs also need to start thinking about how to negotiate the lease. So that negotiation can be verbal, but it has to be on a written document, so the words are not taken by the wind. So that is what requires entrepreneurs to start thinking the need of the legal framework to protect their businesses. And at the same time, it is ideal, even though it might be just one person, one entrepreneur that it is taking the lead on this business, it is important to highlight the need of having a code of conduct. So that is important because once you start growing your business, this is one of the key frameworks that can help the business to grow, because it is the way that businesses are being conducted, and external stakeholders do pay attention to these different cultures, code of conducts that are embedded in the company. Can you take the next slide, ma'am, please? So the next step here is when entrepreneurs figure it out what the legal framework might be and what might work for the business. So they think they need to think about, where am I going to locate if that is a brick and mortar? But then if we choose what today trend it is, the online, right? It is the website, building the network, building, what social media strategy we're going to take. Or if it is a brick and mortar, let's get an insurance, setting up the office, and getting the systems down so the business can actually start operating. But again, entrepreneurs oftentimes believe that entrepreneurship is simply having an idea, and then as if we have a magic wand, we're going to start selling the product or providing services. But there's so much on the back end. So think about day 1 to day 30 being the the behind the scenes of entrepreneurship, things that are not seen from the external view, but they need to happen. So then it provides a foundation. Without the foundation, any businesses can fall down. So it is important that entrepreneurs do pay attention to legal requirement and the things that are needed to start, operating with the business. On the next slide, you will see the importance of, getting the systems, accounting, the bookkeeping, financial management. Um, it is very intuitive, the idea that entrepreneurs need to track the finances, having the numbers squared out, because then it is very likely that eventually, again, the business grows, and there might be someone interested on doing business with you. And some of the things that they will require is to look at the pro formas, past history of the business. So it is important to have from day one all these, again, systems, bookkeeping systems, financial management tools on place to help the business continue a trend to grow and not on going on a decline. And the last part of the, first 30 days of the entrepreneurial journey, it is protecting the intellectual property, right? And we know there's a patents, copyright, trademarks, and trade secrets. Entrepreneurs oftentimes get so caught up on the idea of having a patent or fighting for a patent. But that is still does not neglect the possibility that other businesses, other entrepreneurs can imitate, copy, or try to make an improvement to an existing product. So the patent, it does provide protection, but the patent in itself cannot be productive. It has to have action. And some entrepreneurs do have a passion for inventing, and the outcome of invention, it is to have a product that can be patentable. But then the next step becomes on how to commercialize the product, how to make money, how to monetize from the patent. And that requires a different sets of skills. If entrepreneurs just simply think that by having a patent, it does provide a competitive advantage, that is not true. They might have some sort of protection, but we have seen, and maybe you remember, there's a specific case that happens between Skechers and Nike. So Skechers face a lawsuit from Nike because apparently Skechers violated a patent from Nike. So Nike owns the patent, but Skechers, they did violate it. And I'm not justifying that action. It is, can be within the boundaries of ethics. But the idea here is that Skechers calculated the cost of engaging in infringement of a patent. At the end, they were fined with $80 million. But if you look at the net profit, because they violated that patent, they made more than $100 million. So still, after paying the fine, they still have some profit out of it. So that is just, I'm using that as an example that even though having a patent, it may not be sufficient to protect the business from others to try to make an innovation or an improvement to the existing product that you already have. Megan, how do you like to handle the questions? Do you want me to wait at the end, or can I pop in so we don't keep? Okay. So yeah, I mean, maybe at the Papa John Center, they might have a current estimate on the legal costs and expenses for the legal advice and whatnot on the LLS Corp. But I remember it wasn't more than, I don't know, $1,000, $2,000, Megan, probably.
So I think it's pretty dependent on the startup and what things you'd need. So I think it's hard to give an estimate depending on how much you would need. But most of the time, I would say attorneys are open to having a preliminary conversation with you and talking through what things are necessary and then estimating the cost for that. So Kira, that's kind of how I would answer your question about the cost of a startup from a legal perspective. I would probably connect with a small business attorney and just inquire about what their needs are. And Tia asked about what significant differences there are between an S Corp and a C Corp besides taxes. Again, not a legal attorney. So I would recommend you reach out to somebody who practices law and can help you answer that question a little bit better.
Yeah. The LLC, it is the typical form. It does do the job to protect personal property and expenses from the liability of the business. So most entrepreneurs do engage in a form of an LLC. It is less costly, but it is also based on accounting purposes. So the legal form does go in line with the accounting. So I do agree with Megan. It does require some thought based on a lawyer and an accountant, and typically they do offer the bundle of services because that's the one you want to start having very clear upfront. I have seen cases that they have start making money, but they do not have a legal form, and that can be as problematic, not only in the future but in the immediate, present. So it is very advisable to start looking at it. What it is a point, probably, you know, entrepreneurship, it is not cost free. You need to do a lot of research, and it is expensive in the sense that, it does require some money down. So entrepreneurs do typically start with a negative deficit. So that is, a different topic, but at some point, if you want to think about, entrepreneurs must break even within the next 6 to 8 months. That's typically what on research we see on average. Successful entrepreneurs break even within that time frame of 6 to 8 months. So in the meantime, it is about, a part of a resiliency and whatnot, because it is not a very easy process. It is very curvilinear. So Megan, can you move to the next one, the next slide? So here's what I want to emphasize, that the legal aspects, accounting, and other processes that are most on the operational side are things that and all businesses, all startups must have. When it becomes from day 31 to 100, that it becomes more variable, in the sense that we know what are the processes that must take place, but there is so much room for uncertainty. So when in case of uncertainty that we don't necessarily know what's going to happen, inevitably we as human beings, think about yourselves in your daily basis. You need to make decisions, right? But there's uncertainty on each decision that you make, because you don't know exactly what the outcome will be. You are thinking to buy, um, clothing, a car, whatnot. You do your research and you analyze the potential cost, the benefits, how much money you have, how much money you need, and so on, right? So that seems very rational. But even so, if you find two, three options that are very similar, and you need to choose now from these three options, why you make a decision? And I'm sure many of you may answer, because I do feel a preference for product one as opposed to product two or product three, right? Or maybe because I feel loyal to the brand, or so many other things that are maybe not so quantifiable, but there is room for preferences. And at the end, those preferences are a reflection of who we are as individuals. So when we make the choice, we make some of these decisions based on what has worked in the past. So because in the past I have purchased the same product or the same brand, I might just buy the same brand in the next, in the future. Or maybe because it didn't work, I don't trust it, and then I switch. So there is, again, this notion of uncertainty, that we wish to have the magic ball that predicts exactly what's going to happen. So if we translate this notion to entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs don't necessarily know how these relationships with customers might play out, right? How you handle these relationships with your employees, how you make your first sale, how do you operate when you have 1, 2, then 5 employees. And then at the end, you need to manage this process. So there is so much uncertainty during the process that it is very prone for these underlying cognitive biases, personality. So on the next slide, on the next 4 slides, we're going to cover a big picture. It is this process. So on the sales process, well, yeah, we want to have a process for selling the buying cycle. But remember, entrepreneurs have no history of doing things. They are figuring it out. There's so much trial and error. So whatever they set first, it may not work. and there is so much room for the pivoting, recalibration. But at the end, we are making these decisions. There's a gut feeling, maybe. There is a certain aspect of confidence that we feel this is going to work out because I feel confident. So in this sales process, that happens. On the next one, we'll see that there is also on the operations, right? We need to purchase. Although on the purchasing aspect, the most the intuitive action is to reduce the cost, right? I want to reduce the cost when I acquire raw materials. I want to go and buy it from the top quality, but at a lower cost. And then we need to start thinking, how do we integrate our startup? The startup needs to have a structure. Is this a structure where it is vertically integrated, horizontally? What it is the form that we want? And typically, businesses that are successful, they do tend to have a vertically integrated structure that allows the reduction of cost. However, the disadvantage for entrepreneurs is that they maybe are the only individual or a team of people that are, you know, having this great idea. They put together the resources needed. They establish a firm. So it is now 4 individuals managing and running the business. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have a vertically integrated structure, but instead a horizontally. So again, it can incur in many costs. Imagine if you have 4 members of the team that are running the business, who's going to make the decision? There must be a leader, or the 4 people are going to be the leaders, and that could be problematic at some point. So in these operations and the management of the company, inevitably conflict, it is very possible. The cost associated with conflict, I have seen in the past entrepreneurs, and it's very often, happens very often, many entrepreneurs have disagreements. So it ties back to the very beginning of having a legal structure. So there must be agreements between founders on how they are going to resolve future disputes. So as you can see, day 1 to day 30, it sets the foundation for potential issues and conflicts and problems that might arise in the future. But that happens since day 1, because then when you start looking at day 31st to 100, issues may arise on how you manage the inventory. Do you want to stock a lot? Do you want to stock low? Distributions. So all these things happen. On the next slide, you will see that it is about the managing of the business. Specifically, entrepreneurs do not possess unlimited resources. They are resource constrained. And there is something that it is called bootstrapping. Bootstrapping, it's more of a strategy that entrepreneurs typically leverage to pay later their suppliers, right? You may question, is that really ethical? Well, probably no, but it is a strategy that if you engage with your suppliers and you negotiate that you are going to pay them in the next 60, 90 days, that is within the boundaries of a common agreement, right? So then it is not violating any ethicality on that aspect. But you can bootstrap money by extending, these negotiations and agreements with suppliers, how you pay your invoices, how you ask the customers to pay. Do you extend some sort of a time lag for them to pay? The managing the cash flow. So again, there is so much room for how you do things. It is not one single path that can take you to the outcome of an optimal management of money. It is not that one path take you, but instead it can be very diverse. And the last of the slides on this section of the day 31 to 100, it is the involvement of stakeholders. Entrepreneurs Again, they can start the business being the solo founder. There might be 2, 3, 4 more individuals involved, that it is the entrepreneurial team. But then you start thinking about hiring a new employee, and that it is a reflection that the business is growing. But what if then you start and you need to hire 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 100,000 employees? But not only employees are involved, there's a point that entrepreneurs need to engage investors. Investors come into play because oftentimes entrepreneurs, again, are resource limited and they need to grow. They have high demand, but they cannot face the demand because they are limited in resources. So they need to bring an external investor to help grow the business. Oftentimes, entrepreneurs typically leverage money from family and friends. So inevitably, these become stakeholders, whether entrepreneurs agree on paying a premium, right, to family members or friends who subsidize the business at the beginning. That's a different topic, but they become stakeholders because some family members do expect a return on that money lent. If that doesn't happen, there are conflicts. So again, there is not only the employees, but then investors, but then there are suppliers. How do you treat your suppliers? Do you extend beyond the agreement of the payments in the 60 or the 90 days? How do you manage those relationships? But then it doesn't end up there. Then you have employees, customers. Customers, how do you manage customers? Do you provide quality, healthy products, uh, environmentally friendly products? Do you innovate? What's the relationship that the business and that entrepreneurs have with customers? So then we have employees, customers, suppliers, investors, and there is the community, right? Also, entrepreneurs need to provide to community in different ways. Is it about treating um, the different groups involved in the community? Do they give back to the community and sort of things like that that are impactful for how entrepreneurs involve multiple stakeholders in the business? And don't forget, another stakeholder very important for entrepreneurs, it is government, because then entrepreneurs need to start filing for the licenses and so on, that they need to deal with government. And government typically can constrain and have regulations that monitor the behavior and the actions of entrepreneurs. So there's a clear relationship between government stakeholders and entrepreneurs. However, if you ask me how you deal with them, it can vary very wide. And there are so much room for these cognitive biases, personality traits that come into play, because there is no one size that fits all. So entrepreneurs typically can treat 1, 2, 3 stakeholder groups very fairly, but there are others that are neglected to the margin. And that's because sometimes entrepreneurs do believe it is the right thing, or maybe because there is some need to fulfill their personalistic needs. So it is very variable in this area, that I want to transition then to the importance of having personality traits as yeah yeah you can move on the next. Yeah, and I think I have repeated the next. Can you move to the next one, Megan, please? Yeah, so let's talk about a few personality traits. There are some other personality traits, but these are basically the big five, the most common, that every single individual possess to some degree, 1, 2, 3, or 5 of these dimensions, but at different levels. It is not simply that I have openness to experience or I'm conscientious or not. It is about I do have openness to experience from 1 to 7 or 1 to 10, but I also do have conscientiousness from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. Let's think about a range from 1 to 10. So I can score between 0 and 10, but I do have conscientiousness. I also do have extraversion. Again, from a 0 to 10, I do have some level. I have agreeableness, and I also have neuroticism. The difference is that some are more prevalent or more salient than others. So there are also things that can make me, some triggering that can make me become more salient on conscientiousness as opposed to being openness. In other words, if you study or you study yourselves at single point in time, you might score super high on one single of these dimensions and very low on another. But if you study yourself on a different situation, you may find that your score on conscientiousness goes higher than agreeableness, and so on. In other words, these are personality traits that everybody has, but there might be some triggerings that can make it a little bit more dynamic. But essentially, we do possess personality traits at different levels. So, as I mentioned, in the second stage of the entrepreneurial journey, that it is from the first day 1 to day 100, when we look specifically at day 31 to 100, there's so much variability. So these personality traits have an impact. They do play a role in how entrepreneurs do engage in specific actions that do affect the way that we do entrepreneurship. Or in other words, it affects entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurial journey. So can you move to the next one, Megan, please? So think about one single stage, the ideation or creation, which is at the core of entrepreneurship. On the left-hand side of this the chart, you will see that there are characteristics specific to the ideation and creation stage. For example, there's an emphasis to autonomy and breaking administrative constraints, an initial concept and idea development, seeking opportunities, developing business models, and so on, customer discovery. These are things that are within the ideation and creation stage. But if you compare yourself across your 5 personality dimensions, which one you think has to do more with an emphasis on autonomy? Same, ask yourself about on customer discovery. Which one of these personality dimensions might help me or might make me more attuned to pursue and discover new customers? The same when in case of high ambiguity and uncertainty, which one of these traits might help me navigate the uncertainty? Is the same with experimentation, right? Which one of these traits it becomes more important? And I'm not suggesting that you can adapt these dimensions on yourself. Again, we do have very fixed, enduring traits, which are the openness to experience, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. However, my suggestion is that if we understand ourselves better as a self-improvement, we can see that maybe I can work things out to lower my neuroticism and try to put a little bit of the emphasis on openness to experience. So if you look at bottom of the chart, you see that there's a net impact. So on my research, what we have found after talking to many entrepreneurs, after they have scored themselves across these different characteristics on the ideation and creation, and scoring themselves from 1 to 7 on openness to experience, conscientiousness, the net impact that we see and observe on the research is that the trait that does help overall on this stage of ideation and creation, it is openness to experience. And the least desirable one, it is neuroticism. I mean, I think it is pretty clear on openness to experience, you have an inclination for novelty, you have an inclination for intellectual curiosity, and you want to explore, right? So in this stage of ideation, entrepreneurs really want to explore new ideas, new processes. How can they create value? So the fact that some individuals do score higher on openness to experience, it does facilitate a lot on this process of ideation and creation. Again, it is not that we can switch and turn off one button and then we shut down the neuroticism. Again, we are going to have some level, but we can work things around so that neuroticism doesn't show and doesn't create a peak when we are facing, as entrepreneurs, this ideation and creation stage. Again, we want to be more open to the experience. Also, if you see at the net impact, another very important trait, it is extraversion. And when you are on the ideation and creation, specifically look at the customer discovery, right? Entrepreneurs want to be social, they want to be assertive, and they want to have an excitement about engaging with people. For example, if you are to hire new employees, they want to see you excited about the startup. They want to see you that you have passion, that you really believe this business can make a change in the world. So if you have that extraversion high, it can help you thrive on the specific point of customer discovery. Also on the high ambiguity. Yes, we are living a very uncertain world, ranging from the political economy of entrepreneurship or from the social movements of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs are facing such a dynamic environment. But then after COVID, we experienced something new, something that probably we didn't consider enough, that we need to then adapt, which, a much faster pace to the environment. So there's so much ambiguity, but what it is one of the traits that can help you navigate, it can be extraversion, right? Or even, the openness experience, of course, but probably, conscientiousness. Conscientiousness can help us build a good team, because conscientiousness, it gives you this self-discipline, organization, and reliability. So if you are involved in the product development or ideation, and you have high conscientiousness, of course, you're going to pay attention to the details. You're going to pay attention to having quality of products and services. So then you don't want to have customers reaching back to you complaining that the product is effective or it can be damaging to the health of customers. So in all these things, that once we start breaking down the different steps or stages that are within, the 31 to 100 days of entrepreneurship, and understanding our personality traits can really do make an impact and can be a source of an advantage over others, because we can get ahead of the game by understanding that maybe my agreeableness, it doesn't play as much, right? Because, and I'm not saying that entrepreneurs shouldn't have, but agreeableness might play a role in a different stage, but maybe not in the ideation and creation. Because what agreeableness means is to be compassionate, cooperative, and considerate towards others. Probably agreeableness might work at a different phase, and we will see on the next slides. So this is just one, once we start looking at the ideation and creation. So Megan, can you move to the next one, please? So what about now on the stage of survival and growth? Do we see the similar patterns? So in the first one, we noticed that openness to experience was the highest. But now when we are in the survival, we do see a different pattern. Now we see that conscientiousness, it takes an important, much bigger role in how our personality traits help or can help towards the survival or growth of businesses. So think about the characteristics of the stage of survival, right? Now we deal with innovation and growth. We deal with the product of refining products and services, improving existing products, expanding markets, scaling operations, building the organizational structure, managing competition, and so on. So again, if you look at the net impact, neuroticism keeps scoring the lowest. Neuroticism doesn't really help us either on the stage of survival and growth. And if we understand the definition of neuroticism, it's a trait characterized by emotional instability, vulnerability to stress. So if we understand that entrepreneurship it is uncertain, having high neuroticism is going to help us. It's going to make things worse. We may not take advantage or take action to implement, a decision that might be risky. So with high neuroticism, entrepreneurs cannot necessarily navigate either the ideation phase, but neither the survival growth stage. So therefore, neuroticism, it keeps scoring very, very low on these two stages. But we see that extraversion now, it is important, even more important than openness to experience. So again, with extraversion becomes a characteristic of, sociability, assertiveness. So when you are in the fundraising stage where you need to deal with a lot of investors and get them excited and enroll into the core of the business model, yeah, I mean, having extraversion, it is a required characteristic, right? And also, to some extent, be a conscientious and openness to experience. So these characteristics, again, do play a role in the stage of survival and growth. On the next slide, please, Megan, let's look at the stability and maturity. Which characteristic might play a bigger role? Well, we do observe that conscientiousness keeps scoring very high, openness to experience and extraversion, but not surprisingly, neuroticism keeps scoring the lowest. So across three different stages, ideation, survival, and stability, neuroticism, it is the worst trait that entrepreneurs must exhibit during these stages. That is not, again, it is not something that we can control, turn off as a switch, but we can do things to compensate for this neuroticism. Probably it is a combination of our traits that can help lower or balance out neuroticism for those that do have a high score. But, on conscientiousness, it is the most relevant trait in this stability maturity phase. Because on this phase, what it does require, it is an entrepreneur that it is not only thinking about the product or how to grow, but now it is about leading the company to stability, right? So it is probably thinking about expansion, international expansion, other markets, thinking about structuring the corporate governance now that it involves other stakeholders such as board of directors, advisors, even shareholders. Think about an initial public offering, right? It is growing really, really fast, and it is likely to get venture financing, venture capital financing, but then it does involve many other people in the corporate governance. So again, a conscientiousness trait, it is highly required. The next one, Megan, please. So this is the last slide that I want to share with you, personality and entrepreneurial journey. Can you click on the next one, Megan, please? This is the framework. So this is a current research that it is about a review piece. We wanted on the co-author team, we wanted to summarize what has been done and said about entrepreneurial personality. We cover a wider spectrum of personality traits, not only the big five, but then we're considering honesty, humility, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. So we are covering the full spectrum of the bright side traits and the dark side traits. All to say, dark side traits are not, and I'm going to be very specific and emphasizing, are not desirable traits. However, we have seen that they do have a positive impact in the entrepreneurial journey. What we have seen with narcissism, it is a very powerful trait that can help many entrepreneurs navigate uncertainty, because entrepreneurial journey, it is fraught with many failures. The one trait that have been shown to help entrepreneurs bounce back after failure, it is narcissism, because you have high confidence, but you also have, you think of yourself highly. So despite failure, you're going to keep trying. So that there are certain things, that's the message when the dark side traits come into play, are not desirable, but there are some aspects that have been showing positive influence on entrepreneurial outcomes. So, there is a clear direct relationship between the personality dimensions of humans with outcomes such as firm performance, sustainable behavior, funding, innovation, and so others. But as there is a direct relationship between traits and entrepreneurial outcomes, there are other mechanisms, some other boundary conditions that can enhance the benefits of personality, but also it reduces its effect. So what I wanted to show you on this slide, it is the comprehensive academic work that has been done in the area of personality traits that has a clear, defining, and significant impact on the entrepreneurial journey of entrepreneurs. So with that said, let's take the next minutes that we have for Q&A. And thank you so much for listening and connecting on this great effort of the Papa John Center. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Paul. That was a lot to think about, a lot of great findings that you've done in your research. We do have a couple questions in chat. So Tia asked, what is the importance of complementary personality traits in the founders when thinking about success or failure of the business?
For example, let me give you an example. When you combine humility with narcissism, it does create a so much powerful impact on outcomes, on firm performance. For example, a humble entrepreneur, what the characteristics that this entrepreneur shows are that he is willing to listen and learn and lead with example of good character. However, the deficiency of being humble is that it is not necessarily appreciated in the social environment. Typically, when we see a humble individual, we see him or her as weak, as probably not showing the leadership skills style of a great leader, such as a narcissist, right? So we typically tend to downplay the humble individual, but it can compensate for the narcissism in a way that too much narcissism, a person that thinks extremely highly of him or her, can come across, as disrespectful and potentially downplaying everyone else's efforts. So an example of an entrepreneur that has shown that, it is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, if you watch him, and the late Steve Jobs, if you watch some of his YouTube presentations and videos, you can see that he was an entrepreneur that knew how to balance out humility with his narcissism. He can talk about the great things that Apple was doing, the great products, the great services, the great company that he built. but at the end, he showed humility. And that it is one of the examples that we have seen that does play really well and can have an impact on Apple's performance. Another leader that we have seen these traits of combining humility and narcissism, it is Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba. He also watch his videos, and the way that he communicates, it is greatness with humility. So in academia, what we like to term it is humble bragging, because you can be humble, but at the same time, you can be self-promoting of yourself. We do want to see a combination that can lower the negatives, but enhancing the positives.
We had another question. Luna asked, why did you stop being an entrepreneur yourself to focus on research?
Thank you, Luna. What stopped me to be an entrepreneur? When my wife and I, we had the business, that was back in Mexico. I'm from Mexico. And we experienced the crime. We experienced, mafia. And that was a turning point in our lives that pursuing entrepreneurship understood as value creation, not only for ourselves but for the community and the world. We were discouraged to continue the business, such that we decided to take a different path, a path that can still accomplish the goal of providing a sustainable world for the next generations. And what better way to communicate our insights, our experiences through education, through academia, and through the research that we do that can impact the lives of people in Iowa, and that we want to see that expanded to the international context.
Thanks for sharing that. We had Kira ask if it's possible to share the slides after. Are you okay if we share your slides?
Sure, absolutely. Please feel free to share. Also, if you, what I'm gonna do, Megan, I can send you a more detailed documentation of the steps from the 100 days, so they can see exactly all the items that are. I needed to condense and just show a few, but I can send you that so that they can use it as a checklist.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you. So
Sure.
we'll share those documents and the recording when everything is ready. It'll probably come tomorrow just to give us time to upload the video for anybody who's looking out for it, but it'll come from the Papa John Center team.
Perfect. Yeah.
All right, we're down to just a few minutes. So if you've got any last questions, please add them in the chat now. You're getting lots of thanks. It was a super interesting presentation. Thank you for sharing all of your research and making it really easy to apply to an entrepreneur, and ways for us to think about that as we're starting a business or continuing our business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I wish, all the experiences that we have seen, launching businesses, it is universal, guys. Launching businesses do take this similar approach, but what I like to encourage and motivate, my students, it is that we need to be more self-aware of ourselves, because that is truly having an impact. And not only personality traits, but think more deeply about values and beliefs. Our belief system is super important for our decisions. So that's where my path on research has been focusing for the past few years. So hopefully to illuminate good insights for how can we apply this knowledge and make businesses more successful.
One last question, maybe. So if I am not in alignment with some of those personality traits that you identified as helpful, like for an easy one, let's just say the extroversion. Maybe I'm more introverted, but I want to be an entrepreneur. what advice would you give to those people if
Absolutely.
their skill sets maybe don't match up with this ideal personality trait that we presented today?
Absolutely. Um, we need to value introverts. We need to value them because think about, we are living in a socially constructed world where we have seen only the successes of individuals that are very self-promotion or extrovert, but we have seen many examples of individuals who are introvert and they can make a change in the world. To the extent that society starts valuing those individuals, the better the world can be. So that is one of the of an intriguing future research areas that I want to have, because introverts have been seen and observed to do things better because they do pay attention to the details. What the difference might be, Megan, it is on their self-regulation mechanisms. With these big five, they tend to have uh, an aggressive, in the good way, a self-promotion regulation. But with introverts, they tend to have a more cautious, more, prevention focus regulation mechanism. And that it is what we haven't seen. But the fact of being more prevention focused can be a key of success for lowering poor quality on innovation, poor quality on products, reducing lawsuits, reducing misconduct, reducing social irresponsibility. So these individuals are going to be key in the next few years because they are changing the paradigm of thinking about the entrepreneur, as the profile of being extrovert, the one that speaks up and it's, super agreeable and conscious. But others are going to make this balance that we will see. An empirical question might be who outperforms the other, but you'll be surprised that introverts can outperform others. And not to say that they either one is better, but they do have a potential. So what things they can do, it is a way uh, of us to provide some of the mechanisms, probably intervention mechanisms for how can we better coach these individuals to excel in these other areas that might be lagging behind. But they don't need to change. They don't. They can do things in different ways. So it is about finding those ways that can make them more successful.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're at time and it looks like we've answered all the questions. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We'll get the information and recording out to you by tomorrow and really appreciate your engagement today. Paul, thanks so much for sharing your research with all of us and spending your lunch hour with us.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks so much.